Imagine the rain never really stopping. Not hard rain, just enough to keep everything wet. Your boots, your wool coat, the inside of your haversack. You haven't eaten today, and you didn't eat much yesterday either. There's no fire tonight. Smoke carries farther than a man wants it to out here, and a picket line doesn't need much of a reason to investigate. So you sit with your back against a fence rail, in the dark, and wait for morning the way you'd wait for anything, without expecting it to be better. This isn't a story about battle. It's about the hours in between, the ones nobody painted, spent hungry, wet, and alone, trying to make a single afternoon last until dark during the American Civil War. While uncommon, soldiers occasionally found themselves alone after confused fighting, failed night marches, or becoming separated from their regiment. But for some, especially after a skirmish, scattered a column, or a night march went wrong, survival could suddenly become frighteningly simple. A regiment that broke apart in the smoke and confusion. A wrong road taken after dark, when every fence line and tree line looked the same. Sometimes it was a wound that slowed a man down until the others had moved on without him. However it happened, the result was the same. No company, no rations wagon, no way to signal for help without giving away exactly where you were. There was no tent and no dry ground to speak of. Shelter meant whatever the countryside happened to offer. A hollow behind a stone wall, a shallow ditch, a stand of pine thick enough to slow the rain instead of stopping it. You didn't build a shelter here. You found one, or you didn't, and morning came the same either way. On the first day, hunger still felt like a problem with a solution. You still half believed the column might simply be waiting somewhere just ahead. Hardtack. Hard as a shingle and twice as dry, hardtack was the one thing nearly every soldier carried, whether he wanted to or not. Baked weeks or even months earlier, it had to be soaked in water or coffee before it was fit to chew, and even then it broke apart more than it softened. Carried wrapped in a piece of cloth at the bottom of the haversack, it was gnawed a corner at a time instead of all at once. It didn't spoil, it didn't need a fire, and it didn't ask for anything, which mattered more out here than taste ever did. It wasn't really a meal, it was time. Every small bite putting off the moment the road would have to provide the next one. The last of it ran out faster than expected. It always did. With no wagon to catch up to and no company behind you, whatever the fields offered next had to be enough. Salt pork. A strip of salt pork, carried since the last time rations had been issued, was often the only meat a man had left once the hardtack was gone. Cured heavy with salt to keep it from turning in the heat, it demanded care in its own way. Too much of it without water only made the thirst worse. Still, it kept where little else did. A piece wrapped tight in oilcloth could last for days without spoiling, one of the few things a man could depend on when nothing else held. Cut thin and eaten raw, or held over a small flame until the fat crackled, it was chewed slowly, the salt biting at a mouth already dry from walking. By nightfall there was still no roof, no walls, no dry place to lie down. Finding food had taken most of the daylight. Finding somewhere to spend the night took whatever strength was left. The rain hadn't stopped. It never seemed to. By the second day, the plan was gone. What remained was instinct. Move less, notice more. Take whatever the land offered without wasting strength chasing something better. Somewhere in that second morning, a quieter realization settled in. No one was coming to find you today. Parched corn. A cornfield left standing near an abandoned farm meant something worth the risk of crossing open ground. Ears pulled by hand, the kernels stripped and parched over embers until they browned and hardened, tasting faintly of smoke. Nobody chose it because it was satisfying. It filled the stomach when nothing better was within reach, and a few handfuls carried in a pocket could be eaten walking, one kernel at a time. After a while, even the effort of caring how it tasted felt like more than it was worth. The cold helped make that decision too, along with another night spent sleeping without cover in a coat that never fully dried. Squirrel. If a man had a musket, a shot, and the nerve to risk the sound of it, a squirrel could be one of the most substantial meals the woods offered, though a shot fired for food was a shot that might be heard by more than squirrels. More often, it was a snare or a lucky throw that did the work quietly. Skinned with whatever knife was on hand, it was roasted whole over a small fire, kept low and short-lived, just enough to cook. Never enough to give away a position through smoke or light. What meat there was stretched thin, chewed slowly, every bit of it worth the risk it had taken. After the warmth faded, there was still no shelter, only the dark, the rain, and another night on open ground. Wild onions. Wild onions growing low along fence lines and the edges of untended fields were easy enough to pull if a man knew what he was looking for. Sharp and raw, they cut through the flat taste of parched corn and salt pork, small as that difference was. Eaten straight from the ground, dirt and all, they weren't much of a meal on their own. But by the second evening, staying dry wasn't really possible anymore. The choice had narrowed down to wet, or slightly less wet. Food quieted the stomach for an hour. It did nothing for the cold that settled in after dark. Wild persimmons. Not every persimmon found along a fence row was worth the trouble. Picked too early, they puckered the mouth with a bitterness that lingered for an hour after. Left until they had gone soft and nearly fallen from the branch, they turned sweet enough to feel like something close to comfort. A handful eaten standing beneath a tree was often all there was time for before moving on. They didn't taste like relief. They tasted like borrowed time. Just enough sweetness to keep walking. 2 days without proper shelter changes a man quietly. The hunger stayed. The rain stayed. But the expectation that either one would ease up had slowly begun to fade. By the third day, hunger was no longer the loudest voice. Thirst, exhaustion, and the constant damp had taken its place. The land hadn't gotten easier to move through. You had simply gotten quieter moving through it. Catfish. A slow creek, when one happened to cross the path, sometimes held catfish resting in the shallows beneath a cut bank. There was no guarantee of finding any, but with a length of line and a bent pin, or simply enough patience to feel along the bank by hand, one could sometimes be caught. Cleaned with a knife and cooked whole over a small bed of coals, nothing was wasted. For a little while, it almost felt like a real meal again. Almost. Creek water. Food kept a man moving. Water kept him alive. Creeks, roadside ditches, or whatever rain had collected in a low place were often the only choices there were. When a tin cup or kettle was still on hand, the water was boiled over a small fire, since boiling was the only thing that made it safer to drink. It never tasted clean. It tasted like smoke, like mud, like effort. By now, clean wasn't the goal. Safe enough was. Each swallow was taken slowly, since too much water on an empty stomach brought its own discomfort. Even something as ordinary as warm water had become a kind of comfort. Not because it tasted good, but because it meant another day had been survived. There was still no shelter, no dry clothes, no place that felt safe enough for real sleep. The rain decided where the night would be spent, and there was nothing left to do but accept it. Wild blackberries. Late in the season, a bramble along a fence line sometimes still held a handful of berries the birds hadn't reached yet. Small, sour more often than sweet, they were picked a few at a time and eaten straight from the hand, thorns catching at the sleeve with every reach. They filled the stomach only for a short while, but by the third day, even a handful of wild fruit made another meal feel a little more complete. Nothing about these meals would have seemed remarkable back home, but alone in the countryside with no certainty of another meal and nowhere that truly counted as shelter, every bite brought another hour of strength. By the third night, hunger had stopped announcing itself the way it had at the start. It had become part of the background, like the insects, like the rain, like the sound of your own breathing beneath the trees. Few people ever wrote about days like these. There were no charges to describe, no victories, no medals, just ordinary hours filled with ordinary decisions that quietly determined whether a man would still be alive the next morning. This wasn't heroism, and it wasn't hardship dressed up as meaning. It was simply survival, one decision and one meal at a time.